Let me tell you something that often gets brushed off, laughed at, or justified in the early stages of a relationship, and yet, it's one of the clearest signs of danger ahead. It's when she says something like, "You're lucky I even talked to you." Now, some of you might be thinking, "Oh, come on, she was just joking." Or, "It wasn't that serious. She says stuff like that all the time." But that, right there, is the problem. When you normalize disrespect disguised as humor, you allow the erosion of your self-worth to begin. And once that process starts, it rarely stops on its own. It deepens, it grows. It invades your confidence like a virus. And one day you wake up wondering how you became a shell of who you were before you met her. What many people fail to understand is this: words are not just sound, they are expressions of thought, of belief systems, of identity. When someone speaks to you, especially in intimate relationships, they're revealing how they perceive you and how they perceive themselves in relation to you. When she says, "No one else would put up with you," that's not a throwaway comment, it's a world view. It's her telling you, consciously or unconsciously, that she believes she's better than you, and worse, that you should believe that too. Think about what it means for someone to undermine your worth under the guise of affection. Because it doesn't start with violence. It doesn't begin with yelling or insults. It starts with the little comments, the casual jabs, the subtle comparisons. The passive, aggressive remarks made in front of friends. It starts with the moment you feel small and convince yourself to tolerate it because you don't want to seem insecure or overly sensitive. And that's the trap. One of the most dangerous lies we tell ourselves in relationships is that as long as it's not physical, it's not abuse. But emotional violence is real. Psychological degradation is real. And what makes it even more sinister is that it often hides behind charm, behind attraction, behind the illusion of closeness. That's why it's so difficult to spot and even harder to walk away from. You don't notice the shift happening because it's slow and subtle, like boiling a frog in warm water. Let's get philosophical for a moment. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "What is done out of love always takes place beyond good and evil." And that sounds poetic, but let me challenge it. Because in toxic relationships, people often do horrible things in the name of love. They insult, control, belittle, all while claiming to care, but love without respect is not love, it's ownership. It's power, it's domination dressed up in intimacy. When a woman begins to speak to you in ways that chip away at your dignity, when her words no longer uplift but subtly oppress, that is your cue. And I want to be absolutely clear. It doesn't matter how beautiful she is. It doesn't matter how good the chemistry feels. If she is comfortable belittling you, she is not a safe person to build your future with. We've been conditioned to equate endurance with strength. Especially men, you're told to take it, brush it off, be the bigger person. But emotional endurance isn't the same as emotional health. You shouldn't have to tolerate the person you love. You should feel peace in their presence. A relationship is not a battleground where your self-esteem goes to die. It's supposed to be your safe space, your refuge, and if she's the one putting cracks in your spirit, then what exactly are you fighting to preserve? There's a psychology term called intermittent reinforcement. It's when someone gives you just enough love, just enough affection to keep you hooked, but consistently tears you down otherwise. This pattern creates a toxic emotional dependency, where you start craving their approval more desperately the more they withhold it. You become addicted to the hope that one day they'll say something kind without a backhand. One day they'll see your worth without needing to mock it first. That's not love, that's trauma bonding. So when she says those things, the condescending remarks, the veiled insults, the words that make you feel like you're less than, you need to stop and ask yourself, what would I tell my younger Brother, if I heard his girlfriend say that to him, what advice would I give my son? Because deep down you already know the answer. You just haven't given yourself the permission to live by it. You teach people how to treat you. And every time you allow disrespect, every time you explain it away, you're silently telling her this is acceptable. And let me tell you, someone who truly loves you, who truly values your presence, will not weaponize their words against you, not even in a joke. So leave not because you're weak, but because you are strong enough to choose peace over pride. Because your mental health matters more than your ego. Because you deserve someone who builds you up in private and in public. And because sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do is walk away from what is breaking them, even if it doesn't look broken from the outside. Here's the truth: people don't slip up and say things like "you're lucky to have me" unless they believe it. And if they believe it, they will act on it again and again until your spirit conforms to their delusion. Leave her not out of anger, not to get revenge, but because you finally understand that love should never come at the cost of your self-respect. Let's talk about something far more subtle and, in many ways, far more dangerous than outright disrespect: control disguised as care. When someone tells you, "I just worry about you when you're with those friends," or "you should spend more time with me instead of them," on the surface it sounds thoughtful. Like she's invested in you, like she values your time and your presence, and maybe she does. But there's a fine, almost invisible line between love that protects and love that possesses. And too many people miss it. Control in relationships doesn't always come wrapped in shouting or ultimatums. Often, it comes in soft, emotional packaging, the kind that makes you feel guilty for choosing anything outside the relationship. That guilt is not random. It's engineered, slowly, repeatedly, and with just enough emotional pull that you start mistaking control for closeness. Let's pause for a moment and reflect on a psychological principle. Boundaries are not walls, they are bridges. They allow two individuals to stay connected while still honoring their separate identities. But when someone starts to manipulate how you move, who you talk to, and what you do with your free time, all in the name of love, they're not building bridges anymore. They're constructing a cage. It doesn't always start with big restrictions. It starts with little comments. "I don't like how she looks at you. Why do you always need to talk to your boys every weekend? You must not love me if you'd rather go out than stay home with me." What's happening here is the creation of an emotional hierarchy where her feelings sit at the top and your individuality is somewhere at the bottom. And because it's dressed in emotion, because it's wrapped in concern, it's easy to confuse it with love. But it's not love, it's surveillance, it's a test, it's a slow rewiring of your autonomy, and you begin to adjust. You cancel plans more often, you start pre-clearing decisions with her, you question whether maintaining outside friendships is even worth the stress. And this is where the philosophical damage begins, because every time you shrink yourself to avoid upsetting her, you're not just making compromises, you're diluting your essence. Relationships are supposed to bring you into deeper alignment with who you are, not slowly dissolve your edges until you're easy to manage. If someone needs to restrict you in order to feel secure, that's not about you. That's about their own unresolved insecurities. They're unhealed wounds, and instead of facing those wounds, they project them onto you in the form of rules, restrictions, and guilt trips. Now, some people might say, "But isn't it normal for someone to care who you hang out with?" Yes, it's normal to express concern. It's normal to have preferences, but what's not normal is when your entire social life starts revolving around their comfort. When you start feeling anxious every time you make a decision that doesn't include them, that's not love. That's emotional conditioning, and if you're not careful, it evolves into isolation. You start losing your community. Your people, your sense of self, and the more isolated you become, the more dependent you are on her approval, on her mood, on her validation. That's how the control deepens, not because you were weak, but because the manipulation was smart enough to masquerade as devotion. Let me take it deeper. Control, in its most dangerous form, doesn't look like domination. It looks like dependence. She doesn't have to yell at you or threaten you. All she needs to do is convince you little by little that her presence is the only source of emotional safety you have left. So now, even when you feel suffocated, you stay, because leaving would mean stepping into loneliness. But what you don't realize is, you're already lonely, you're just used to it. Loneliness in a controlling relationship doesn't feel like absence, it feels like silence. Like self-censorship, like second-guessing your every move, and trust me, nothing will rob you of your peace more quickly than living in a constant state of emotional submission. Here's what I want you to remember. Love is not supposed to feel like surveillance. You should not feel like you're being watched, evaluated, or subtly punished for being who you are. And the moment you begin changing parts of yourself just to avoid conflict or to avoid disappointing her is the moment you need to check in with your soul and ask, what am I losing in order to keep this relationship going? Because if the answer is your freedom, your voice, your friendships, your sense of self, then I'm here to tell you that's too high a price. We've glamorized the idea of sacrifice in relationships, that real love means giving up parts of yourself. But I would argue the opposite. Real love should never require you to abandon your own identity. It should invite your full self to the table, not just the parts that are easy to manage. If she needs to control you to feel secure, you are not in a partnership, you are in a performance. And no matter how good the chemistry is, no matter how beautiful she is, no matter how much you want it to work, if your freedom becomes the cost of admission, you need to leave. Because your autonomy is not up for negotiation. So here's what I'll leave you with. Love that demands your submission isn't love. It's ownership. Now let's talk about something far more invisible, but every bit as damaging as overt disrespect or control, gaslighting. It's one of the most dangerous things someone can do to you in a relationship, not because it leaves bruises, but because it leaves you doubting your own mind. You express a concern and she says, "You're too sensitive." You bring up something she said and she replies, "I never said that." You try to explain how you feel and she counters with, "You're imagining things," or "You're overreacting." And slowly, subtly, your internal compass starts spinning. That is gaslighting, and it's not just a miscommunication. It's not just a difference in emotional language. It's a psychological tactic, conscious or not, that erodes your ability to trust your own perception. And once that trust is gone, you become dependent on her version of reality. You stop speaking up, you question your memory. You apologize when you didn't do anything wrong. You begin walking on eggshells, not because she's angry, but because you've learned that your truth isn't safe. Gaslighting is not always loud. It's not always dramatic. Most of the time, it's quiet. It hides behind calm tones and polite smiles. And that's what makes it so effective. If someone yelled at you and called you names, it would be easy to spot. But when they gently rewrite history or laugh at your emotions like they are absurd, it gets harder to recognize. You begin to believe that maybe you are the problem. Maybe you are too emotional. Maybe you do remember things wrong. But let me be clear, when someone loves you, they don't make you feel confused about what's real. There's something deeply spiritual about being believed, about having someone say, "I see your experience, and even if I don't fully understand it, I respect it." That is what builds emotional safety. But when she constantly rewrites your version of events, when she makes you feel like your thoughts aren't valid, she's not just disagreeing with you, she's teaching you to doubt yourself. And that is incredibly dangerous, because once you stop trusting your own voice, She doesn't need to control you. You'll start doing it for her. You'll begin editing your own thoughts before you speak. You'll downplay your feelings before they ever leave your mouth. You'll silence yourself to maintain peace, even when it costs you your truth. That's not peace, that's psychological submission. Now, let's pull this apart philosophically. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said, "The most painful state of being is remembering the future, particularly the one you'll never have." And in gaslighting relationships, this hits deeply, because what you end up mourning is not just the person in front of you, but the version of yourself you lost trying to be understood by them. The future you imagined, the stability you thought was possible, the clarity that kept slipping through your fingers. You might even find yourself defending her to others, saying she didn't mean it like that, or she had a rough childhood, or she just gets overwhelmed sometimes. And look, compassion is beautiful, but compassion without boundaries is self-destruction. You can understand someone's trauma without allowing them to traumatize you. You can acknowledge their struggles without erasing your own. The moment someone tries to erase your version of reality, they are no longer engaging in healthy disagreement. They are asserting dominance over your perception. That's psychological warfare. It's not about the facts anymore. It's about control. It's about rewriting the rules of reality until you no longer trust yourself enough to stand up for what you feel. And here's the thing. Gaslighting doesn't need to be constant to be effective. It just needs to be strategic. One moment of self-doubt, one seed planted in your mind, is enough to change how you speak, how you think, how you love. That's why it's so hard to leave, because gaslighting doesn't just confuse you about them, it confuses you about yourself. So what do? You ground yourself in truth. You start journaling, keeping a record of what you felt, what you saw, what was said. You start noticing the patterns. You find someone outside the relationship who can mirror your experience back to you without judgment. Because sometimes you need someone else to remind you that you're not crazy, you're just being manipulated. Most importantly, you listen to your intuition, that quiet voice that says something doesn't feel right. That's not paranoia. That's wisdom, and the longer you ignore it, the quieter it becomes until one day you won't hear it at all. And let me tell you, losing your intuition is far more dangerous than losing a relationship. When a person repeatedly invalidates your feelings, when they twist your words, when they make you doubt your sanity, you don't owe them more chances. You don't owe them an explanation. You owe yourself safety. You owe yourself clarity. You owe yourself peace. You leave not because you're weak, but because you've finally remembered who you are. You leave because your reality is not up for debate. So here's what I'll leave you with. When someone tries to make you feel crazy for speaking your truth, it's not your mind that's broken, it's the relationship.